Welcome to Season 2 of Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm Joshua Sharfstein, Vice Dean for Public Health Practice and Community Engagement, and a former Secretary of Maryland's Health Department. Our goal is to bring scientific evidence and experience to the public health news of the day through informative interviews with scientists, community leaders, policy experts, public health officials, clinicians, and more. If you have ideas or questions for us to cover, please email us at publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Today, Stephanie Desmond speaks with Sam Stanley, president of Michigan State University, which decided not to have in-person learning this fall after seeing what happened to other schools when they opened their doors. Dr. Stanley is not only a college president, but he is also an infectious disease doctor. Let's listen.
Sam Stanley, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So you are the president of Michigan State University, which is one of the largest universities in the United States. I see about 50,000 students, and you decided to halt plans for in-person instruction. Can you tell us a little bit about that decision?
So ever since March, when we first decided to go fully remotely in the face of the beginning of the outbreak in the state of Michigan, really when the first two cases were reported, we've been thinking about what it would take to come back again and how we could do that safely. And we went through a very, intense process. And we involved a number of people on campus thinking about these issues. What would we do about housing? What would we do about instruction? How could we make campus as safe as we could? And we were really reassured as we went through the summer in June, as we saw cases falling in Michigan, that this would be the right time to consider doing this. A couple of things happened during the summer that were red flags for us. One was we had a major outbreak at a bar in East Lansing that made national news. More than 200 people eventually infected from really a couple of day exposures. Then when our athletes came back, we pre-tested them on arrival. We had about 100 coming in initially. Only one tested positive, so we were around 1% at that point. But as they spent time on campus, we actually had more cases turn positive. And that was concerning for us, because this is a group we'd focused on in terms of susceptibility and making sure we were hoping they would not get infected. And then the last thing that was really important for us was when we looked at what started to happen in other schools. And so we were prepared to start September 2nd. We looked at what was happening with UNC. A number of their protocols looked similar to protocols we'd had in place to try and be safe. And then we looked at Notre Dame, which had also pre-tested students and then still had outbreaks on campus. So with those things in mind, given that we weren't really doing anything different than those schools were, I felt it made the most sense at this point in time to postpone. But the protocols we had in place, I thought would not be able to stop widespread potential spread among our student body. I was much more confident about transmission between students to teachers in classrooms. I thought we'd solved that problem, but I was not excited about the possibility of communal living in the dorms and the risks that might pose.
We're seeing a lot of schools choosing to open, and we're also seeing a lot of students congregating sort of against the advice of their college presidents. Do you feel like this age group is just too tough to get them to follow the rules?
It is a challenge. And I think part of it, though, is understandable. Because if you think about, obviously, if you look at our tables of mortality and what we know about this disease and what it's like in 18 to 24-year-olds, it tends not to be as severe and tends not to, as far as we can tell, have long-term consequences. Now, I know we're still investigating that. But in terms of their perception of risk, I think their perception of risk is very low. If you take students who come from communities where there's been major outbreaks, some of our students from Southeast Michigan and Detroit in particular, they're much more aware because they had family members who were involved in large outbreaks. They've lost an aunt or an uncle or a parent. And so they take it much more seriously. But for many of our students, it just hasn't come to their radar as a potential threat. And I think that makes it more difficult. Plus, as you know, this is an age when people are used to experimenting to some degree, used to not following the rules. So I think it is a little more difficult. And I think it really is a very, very powerful educational challenge for us. And for institutions like ours who do educate, we should be the people who can do it better. But so far, I think at least in some places, we haven't been so successful.
Mm-hmm. It almost seems an impossible ask.
I think it's very difficult if you think about when people come back and you think about people at that age, the physical distancing, the social distancing may be the most difficult. I think the mask wearing, I'm a little less sympathetic if people are not doing that because it seems to me you can do that and still interact with people. But I think the physical distancing is very difficult for them. And then again, I think, there's a little bit of a sense of invulnerability and a little concept, again, that, even if it does happen to me, people don't get sick. And I think that really does drive a lot of the behavior. So I don't think it's impossible. And I'm following some places that I think through campaigns may have gotten more buy-in from students. And so I'm trying to understand what can we do in an educational point of view to help people take more personal responsibility. But before we pick on students too much, Stephanie, there's a lot of the US that aren't doing this well too. And there's a number of places where people my age are not behaving themselves and doing the right thing as far as this goes. So it's not just, I think, in this age group, but they have been an age group that's been increasing. And that was one of the things we thought about again in opening, was the 18 to 24 age group had been the site of the most increase recently in COVID-19 cases.
Mm-hmm. Point taken about all folks not really following the rules. A lot of our listeners don't know, but you are an infectious disease doctor by training. Does that give you a different perspective on, how we move forward?
So I think it does. A lot of my work before I went full-time into administration really focused on emerging infectious disease. And I actually led a major center in the Midwest Regional Center for Excellence in Biodefense and Emerging Infectious Diseases. So we thought a lot about potential pandemics. And I think we were focused on influenza. Then we saw SARS, and we focused on SARS as well, the original one. So when this first appeared in Wuhan, I was paying a lot of attention. And I thought, well, it'll probably be the third coronavirus we've seen now. It'll probably behave like the first two. We'll be able to control it with standard public health measures, and it'll go away. And clearly I was wrong about that. I think this is one of the most interesting diseases I've seen from an infectious disease perspective. The wide range of symptomology is really interesting to me. You don't see this in a lot of diseases where you go from people completely asymptomatic, capable of spreading disease, to people who are incredibly sick and die from this disease. And again, that's not very common among diseases. Most diseases really have a much more narrow range, I think, of symptoms in people who get it.
So I know that one of the things that is very important at Michigan State is football. And I know that your school was very involved in the Big Ten's decision to postpone fall sports. So could you talk to me a little bit about that decision?
So obviously a very difficult decision because, as you said, Stephanie, this is an incredible part of the Michigan State University experience. And for Big Ten in general, we're great in academics, but we're also great in athletics. And it's an important component of what we do. I think we set up a process, again, that was really going to be medically informed. A tremendous amount of weight was given to a new committee that was established to look at the medical risks, which included infectious disease specialists, trainers, doctors, as well as student athletes as well on this committee to provide input. And I think that received a lot of weight in our decisions. And I think what happened was there were just a number of uncertainties that we saw going forward that we had trouble dealing with. One was the uncertainties around the availability of the testing. Could we get it done fast enough? Would turnarounds be fast enough? Would we have adequate numbers to do this safely? That was one concern. Uncertainties around what are the effects of COVID in people who recover from COVID-19, how long there might be risk of things like cardiac disease or other things after recovery, and what that meant to our ability to, again, to say when athletes would be safe to play. And then, of course, just this problem with transmission and the ability to control transmission. And could we create circumstances where we were very confident that athletes would not be spreading COVID to other athletes and faculty and staff, or rather coaches and staff? So I think there was enough uncertainties for us to want to not do it at this point in time and want to study it in more detail. And that's what we're doing. We set up a new committee now, a little more broad in terms of including some of the presidents will be on this as well, to take a look at what we can do and what we might do differently to allow us to open potentially in the spring if that's possible. But a lot of it will depend on where the virus is at that point in time too.
How did that decision land? I mean, how did people take the decision that the Big Ten was going to scrap its season?
So I think it's been, people really look upon it as it's pretty polarizing from a point of view. I would say that there's some people who say you're doing the right thing. You're putting student athlete health first. That's the most important component. And that's, I think, how we looked at it. And there's others who say you didn't try hard enough. This could probably be done. And football's a risky sport anyway. People risk getting injured. They're adults. They're willing to take this risk. If they want to play, you should give them an opportunity to play. And we have heard that from some of our fans and others who've asked that question as well. I'm very comfortable with the decision we made. I think it was the right one. It was the overwhelming consensus of the group to do this. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't continue looking and shouldn't continue to try and find ways to do this, just given, again, the importance of football on our campuses.
It seems to me that in some states, in some conferences, they just want to play and they're going to just play. And to me, it seems, as someone who's watched plenty of football in my day, that it seems really hard to socially distance in football.
You can't. You're absolutely right. And I thought about that a lot too. And I think if you watch a practice and you see offensive linemen and defensive linemen right in each other's faces, breathing on each other, grunting on each other, pushing each other, it seems like an ideal mechanism by which you transmit. The outdoors is the only thing that's helpful to you in that scenario. And so I think that's why you have to have testing protocols in place that allow you to believe that you can really say with great certainty, that someone's not infected at the time they're engaging in that type of contact. And so everybody who's engaging that doesn't have a risk of being infected.
Now, you have students who are still living off campus and congregating. Is there anything you can do from your perch to encourage them to be careful?
Yes, and we're trying to do everything we can to do that. So we're continuing to communicate with them. We had a campus compact in place, and as part of that campus compact, and that's still in place as far as we're concerned, we asked them and said that they needed to comply with not only our rules on campus, but the rules off campus as well. So executive orders by the governor for mask wearing, local municipal orders on what constitutes an appropriate assembly, how many people can be outside, how many people can be inside. We expect them to follow those orders. And we're working with East Lansing now, the community where we're located, so that if they issue a citation or cite people for not following those rules, they're going to transfer that information to us. And we're going to have the ability then to put the student into our judiciary system with the possibility of suspension. We've seen this happen in other universities. Ohio State, I think, suspended 220 plus students on an interim suspension. And so we're serious. We're hoping they want to do the right thing. I think it's important they do the right thing. But for those who really don't seem to think about the consequences, then I think we do have to have some academic consequences potentially for them if they're not doing the right thing. But we also want to do more than that. We want to educate. One of the things we're trying to do is we have amazing people in our residence halls, our RAs, who now don't have enough work to do in the residence halls because of the decision we made. So we're looking at sending them out, both virtually and occasionally in person, to some of the fraternities, sororities, to some of the major apartment complexes in the area to help them, again, talk to students about the right behaviors in this environment as well. We really want to be the best neighbors we can in the community, and so we'll do everything we can to try and do that.
Mm-hmm. And I guess in many ways, if students are congregating in fraternity, sorority houses and other off-campus living, it almost defeats the purpose of not having them come in to school.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we tried to make that pretty clear to parents as well. Some people probably had leases they couldn't break, but we were pretty clear in our communications. We tried to be that this was a safety measure we were taking. And the goal was to have students stay at home as opposed to coming to campus, because we thought in general it would be safer to be in your home environment than in the congregate environment housing that we have on campus. But we do have some individuals who are not as safe in their homes they feel in their environment. We have international students from MSU as their home. And so for those students, we still are having them on campus. So we'll have about 2,400 people, maybe slightly less than that, living on campus because of the people who meet those criteria.
I understand that you came to Michigan State just a year ago.
Correct.
And this has been quite a roller coaster of a year for you, I imagine. Not what you expected.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And first of all, I don't think the Board of Trustees of Michigan State really looked at my qualifications as an infectious disease doctor when they considered hiring me for the position. So they got a bonus, I guess, on that if you look at it. But it has been challenging. You know, earlier on, one of the biggest things was I hired a new football coach for the university. I thought that would be one of the most challenging things. But seriously, this is, we're in the midst of, as everyone knows, an extraordinary pandemic. It's been challenging to navigate, I think, for everybody. There's no playbook, to get back to football analogies, for how you deal with this. But I think, the best thing we can do is continue to try and be data-driven and evidence-based in the decisions we made. And I think that helps a lot. And I'll give a shout out to Hopkins. Hopkins did the same thing we did 2 weeks before classes were to start. Roughly, I believe they made the decision to go remotely. And I think their leadership in terms of helping public deal with this and the data you provide and so on has been doing great work. So I appreciate the things that you do and the educational missions you have on this.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. Sam Stanley, I really appreciate it.
Stephanie, it was so nice talking with you. Thank you.
Public Health on Call is produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, Stephanie Desmond, and Lamari Morales. Audio production by Spencer Greer, Niall Owen McCusker, Cian Oates, and Matthew Martin, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Thank you for listening.